Oh, hi! Oh, I'm talking to you on the phone for decades. It feels like wonderful. Good to see you. Now, you're missing a little bio sheet. Let me get you one. You've got it. All right.
How are you? I'll give you a big hug, but I'm...
Okay. I believe there's some more seats if you want to go up. There, if you go up the stairs, those of you who are standing, there are bleachers up above. Good evening. I'm Swanee Hunt, and I direct the Women in Public Policy program here at the Kennedy School, which was actually started by Joe Nye. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
So would you rather hear the bad news or the good news first? I'll give you the bad news first. Okay. The bad news is that there have been some extraordinary resolutions passed by the UN Security Council and the G8 and the OAS and the EU demanding women's full participation in peace processes, but they haven't been implemented. They're supposed to have been implemented, but they haven't been. So 3 years after the UN Security Council resolution, there are 50 special representatives of the Secretary General, and only one, count them, one, is a woman. And in Iraq, when we went in as the US and pulled together the first meeting of future leaders for the new government, 500 future leaders, 3 were women. So there's a big gap between what our walk is and what our talk is around the world. Now, here's the good news. The good news is that despite all the obstacles, there are people who care about this and who are finding ways to work at the grassroots level, as members of parliament, as military officers, human rights lawyers, etc. I'm going to introduce to you our speakers this evening. You have descriptions of them that are much fuller than what I'm going to say. I'm just going to mention a couple of things. First, Bong Suk-son, who is from Korea, South Korea. She is the first woman to serve on the National Election Commission, and she has twice been chair of the Election Commission in East Timor. She is founder and president of the Center for Korean Women and Politics, and is a visiting professor at the Graduate School of NGO Studies. Then, Zainab Bangura, who has provided conflict resolution training to commanders in Sierra Leone. She founded the Campaign for Good Governance, and she has worked with grassroots women and professional women to help create the Mono River Women's Peace Network, bringing together women from Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. You also ran for president in your spare time, as I recall.
Wow.
Right? Down the way, Ala Talabani, who was the co-founder of the Iraqi Women's High Council just last month. She before was for 5 years the vice president of the Kurdistan Women's Union, co-founder of Women for a Free Iraq. She's heading the Constitution and Democracy Committees at Voices of Women in Iraq. And that was the first post-war conference to address the needs and resources of Iraq's women. And she has held and put together several other conferences inside Iraq. And Luz Mendez, who has weathered a very, very tragic and difficult war in Guatemala where more than 100,000 people were killed. She is now the president of the Advisory Council to the National Union of Guatemalan Women. During the peace talks, which went on for, was it 5 years?
5 years.
5 years. She was the only female member of the delegation of the Guatemalan National Revolutionary Unity. And she also was brought by the UN to consult in Burundi in their peace process to figure out how to introduce gender into a peace process there. Now, more good news. In the middle of these extraordinary women is a guy who gets it. Joe Nye was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs and the chair of the National Intelligence Council. He writes about the paradox of American power, talking about hard power and soft power. And Joe, I'd say you're surrounded by some pretty wonderful soft power right now tonight. So enjoy yourself. I'd like to simply make this a conversation, first here on stage and then with you in our audience, and ask any of you to reflect on your experience in bringing women's voices into the peace process.
Well, I would like to begin sharing with you the role played by Guatemalan women in the peace process, both as the Guatemalan peace agreements were signed several years ago. Maybe I should mention very briefly some of the causes that provoked that this internal armed conflict initiated in Guatemala. Just to mention the titles, it was the extreme poverty, the total lack of civil and political rights, and an external military-led intervention. As a result of that, we had 36 years old of an internal armed conflict that finished at the end of 1996. In the whole process of peace negotiations, women played a role as actors. And I would like to stress this because women are more than passive victims of conflicts. We really can and have been very active actors in bringing peace. So in the Guatemalan peace negotiations, women took part in this process mainly in two spaces. As you know, women are mainly stay apart of the formal peace negotiations. So the Guatemalan women's associations began to weigh a way by which they would be able to influence the peace process. So together with other civil society associations, they asked the creation of a table of dialogue, a parallel table of dialogue made by civil society organizations. So the format and the agenda of the Guatemalan peace negotiations allowed the creation of this assembly in which women played a really wonderful role. because they were able to, in the discussion of each one of the topics of the peace agenda, to bring their own needs, their own proposals, their own aspirations for a peaceful Guatemala. And they were able to include their women's needs and dreams into the proposals that were sent to the direct table of negotiations between the Guatemalan government and the Revolutionary Unity. I, in this last table, had the opportunity to take part as a member of the URNG. So I had this opportunity to support the proposals of the Guatemalans women's associations. I supported them, and I advocated in the table of negotiations in order to have gender-specific commitments included. But I also want to mention that I was not alone, even though I was, during almost the whole process of negotiations, I was the only woman there. I was really not alone. I felt the support of other women from the international community. Let me share with you. When we were discussing the socioeconomic topic, it took place in Beijing, the 4th World Conference on Women. And I had the opportunity to go there, and it was included in the platform of action that women have to have the opportunity to be part of the peace process. And it was a incredible source of strength for myself. So I could feel the support of the international community. I could feel the support of other women. As a result of the conjunction of these 3 different kinds of efforts, the Guatemalan Peace Agreement have a gender perspective. This is the first good news I wanted to share with you.
That is good news.
Well, it's a little better than the case of Korea, it seems to me, because we are living in a divided country. There are so many efforts to ease the tension on the Korean Peninsula and establish the peace, which is based on the nonviolence principle. There are so many talks between South and North on the governmental level, but there are no single woman delegates at all. The woman wants to reflect our own perspective on reconciliation and cooperation between South and North, but totally neglected by the male-dominated system. So women's NGOs made a coalition to get proper representation in politics, not only in politics, including all sectors of society. So this year, 351 women NGOs made a coalition and are fighting to reform our political system. Until now on, we do have 30% quota system for the National Assembly proportional representative seat. We do have 46 seats out of 273. But we raised up to 50% now. That means at least 23 seats of total National Assembly seats are guaranteed for women.
That's 23 of the 273 will be guaranteed for women.
That's true. But we like to increase the total number of proportional representative seats up to 70 or 99, not 46. 46 is too small. Even though you have 50% of 46, that means you can get only 23 seats. So we like to expand the total seat number up to 70 or 99. So we are fighting for it now. So next April, we are expecting general election. I think women can make more than 10%. I hope I can get it.
How do you get women to run for office?
Well, it's very difficult because of the culture, maybe political system, and hierarchical, maybe confusion and authoritarian political culture very much inhibit women run for public office. And also political behavior is very much dominated by male politicians. You have to have big money for election, and you have to have some dirty business behind your back. So it's very difficult. Women enter to the politics. The main, very important sources are spread in the sauna or the golf course or some very secret places. So when women get the information, it's only the secondary, not a primary. So even though we urge women to run for public office, they say, no, I can't do it, So it's very difficult. So I organized one special women's organization, which we call Korean Women for Legislature. I set up 2 goals. One is for monitoring local assembly as well as the National Assembly. You just sit in the observation seat and observe what they do. And then after 1 week or a month, then you can get, you can see what the assembly people do. Then after 6 months, I asked to her, how do you feel? Then she say, well, I think I can do. About a year later, I asked her again. What she said is, I think I can do better. So then I approached her again to run for public office. Then she said, I may. Then we train her how to contact voters, how to raise money, how to take polls, how to make your image. We train them as a good candidate. Then let her run for public office. This is the way how we approach to bring more women to politics.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As somebody who actually comes from a country that is in the post-conflict phase, which is Sierra Leone, where I come from, we had a conflict for 12 years. It's one of the most brutal conflicts. The most challenging aspect of peace is the consolidation and sustainability of the peace process.
The what did you
The
say?
consolidation, because peace is a process. It takes time. A lot of people go with this misconception: when you sign a peace agreement, that's the end of it. It takes a lot more effort and energy. And I think that is the area a lot of time where women actually come in. Because first, they are not parties to the conflict, so they can normally take neutral ground, position. And when rebels move out from the bush, come to the city, they come with a lot of self-doubt. They are not very sure. They don't trust anybody. They have a lot of problem in adjusting to the rules of the game, the politics, because they get what they want through the barrel of a gun. Here, they have to follow the rule of law. And I think women are very good in building bridges of compromise, collaboration and cooperation. Men obviously build walls of confrontation because for them, politics is about power. Women, politics is about day-to-day life. It's about their children going to school. And when we signed the peace agreement, I was the leader of the civil society movement in Sierra Leone. And I fought against the rebels. I was completely against them. But when the rebels came to town, we realized, after talking to them, we realized we needed to work with them. We gave them the hand of friendship. We provided institutional support. So their offices, they just get there, sit in the morning. They don't even know how to do. Sit down with them, draw up their terms of reference. Actually, literally tell them how to run their offices. We train their commanders on conflict resolution. There was a time when they had so much problems with the UN, we intervened. We became mediators between the UN. They will call in the middle of the night to say the man is refusing to take the peace process. He disagreed with the members of parliament because the Constitution says everybody is subjected to the law, to parliaments. And here was a man who is committed so much atrocity, who is being given the status as vice president, and he's been told in the peace agreement that he's only answerable to the president. And now Parliament summons him and says to him, you have to come to Parliament and explain why your people are not disarming. For him, you can't tell him that. So it was very difficult, but then the women, we intervened, we sat down with him, we explained to him what it means, the role of Parliament, and tried to explain to him, just imagine if your government is in power.
But paint this for me. So when you say the women intervened, how many women? What did you do?
Well, what happened, because immediately he came to town.
Okay.
You know,
the head of the rebel.
The head of the rebel,
Okay.
for the Sanko. Who, in the first place, a lot of people didn't even accept that he was real. So for the first time he came to town, you could see the shock. Everybody wanted to see him because people had not seen him for like 20 or 30 years. He's been out of contact. And so he came with this issue of being a vice president, because to accept him to sign the agreement, they gave him the status of vice president. So he was made to believe, and this is elementary school dropouts, so you can just imagine his level.
And there'd been all the mutilations.
All the mutilation and everything.
Chopping off
He was not
hands.
very sure of people, so he even had to come with his own security. So when we then decided as a women's group, with myself leading the delegation.
How many on the delegation?
About 16.
16
women. We had
Okay.
lawyers, we had doctors, we had different people. We actually went to see him, to talk to him. And then he told us that he was sincere and everything. And we developed a relationship with him, and we'll talk to him occasional basis. So people came to realize that the only people who could reach him, who he could give access to, were the women. And even though in my case, he had made 2 attempts of assassination, there was a time I had to run into exile for 10 months. I had to escape. I lost my house, my property. So this was a man who was running after me to get me. And then he came, I went to meet him, and we established a relationship. And so when Parliament invited him to go to Parliament, he refused. We called him on the phone and made an appointment with him, and sat down with him and explained. And one of the things I got to learn is a lot of the time, they do a lot of things out of ignorance, but they're so proud and arrogant. They refuse to accept they don't understand and they don't know. So they reject a lot of things because they don't understand. And the arrogance is a defense mechanism they put in front of them so that people don't understand them. So they try to create this myth around them. So sitting with them on a one-to-one basis, most of the time, he came to depend on me. So even though when I do realize, sometimes I criticize him, he goes out and defend. And he says, the thing I like about Zainab is that she has constructive criticism. Because I'm honest with him and able to pinpoint with just the 2 of us in the room and said, this is wrong. You cannot do this. This is not accepted.
Zainab, could he, in your opinion, could he have taken that from a group of men who were...
It was difficult because he looked at the men as his opponents.
Uh-huh.
Because sitting across them, most of the men, they fight together with the men. So he's suspicious of every man because he feels that this man might be supporting the government. The men were the ones who were in the army. The men were the ones who were in the civil defense forces. So that was the problem. Even with the UN, a lot of time I'll sit in my office and the special representative will try to call him. He will refuse to take the call. And then he will call me in our office and say, Zainab, I'm trying to reach him. He doesn't. And one of the most interesting experience I had with him was when the Minister for Development was coming to Freetown Class Short. Because the president, his office was in his house. The president's office was in his own house. So every time people go to see the president in his house, he insisted that people have to see him in his own house. And the British decided the class shot should not go to his house. Instead, President Kaba should actually set an office in State House where the meeting will take place. But then class shot definitely needs to talk to him because he has to disarm. He has to give up the guns. So class shot, the British sent him a letter. He ignored the letter. He refused to respond to the letter. So I got a call from the British High Commissioner to say, we have this problem, Shot is coming in a matter of days. And Tony Blair has instructed her that she should not go to his office. Because this is a power game they are playing now. He knows by them going to his office, it's legitimizing his control and his superiority in the process. So they called me. And I went to see him. I made an appointment and I went to see him and I sat with him. I said to him, you know, we never agreed. You know, I was against the peace process. I was against you. I fought against you. But have you asked yourself for one moment, Why did I change my position? He said no. I said, it was Claire Schultz who spoke to me. She told me to give peace a chance. I said, the budget that this country runs on, she is responsible for that. The house in which you are, she pays the rent. The chair you're sitting, she bought it for you. This woman is, with all that she's done to support you, you come, she's coming here, you tell me that you don't want to see her, you want her to come to your office. He said to me, he never said that. He never got the invitation letter. I said to him, are you sure? He said yes. I said, can I use your phone? I picked up his phone and I called the British High Commissioner. I said, can you issue the invitation to him? The British High Commissioner issued the invitation, he agreed. Then he started explaining to me some of the problems he's having with the government. So I said to him, this is a very good opportunity for you. When you go to her, tell her the problems you're facing with the government. And explain to them how much. The joke we have with the British people now is they say marginalization. I said, tell her that you have been marginalized. He used the word more than 10 times in the meeting he had with her. So everybody started blaming me. But this is what, because for women, they look forward. Women are easy to put the past behind them. After war, women talk about their losses and how to rebuild their lives, their community, and their homes. Men talk about the number of guns they have, how they want to keep the war machinery intact. So in the process of peace building after war, women are more effective than men. Because to women, the priority, and if you look at the statistics in Sierra Leone, women in the refugee camps in Guinea and Sierra Leone insisted they needed schools in their community before they can go back. Women were very specific on things that have to do with social services, which they peg. But men are not like that. And so this is the reason why in the process of consolidating peace, in the process of peace building, which sometimes is very, very challenging, because we must remember it's very easy for a country that is just emerging from conflict to go back into conflict than a country that has never been in conflict. Because the machinery is still there, the arms are still there.
Right.
So the issue of women building bridges, extending arms, and for us in the Mano River Union countries, the 3 countries of Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, we have worked together. And the most interesting experience I had, as most of you know about the Liberian conflict that they just had a negotiation in Accra. Because I have worked in the 3 countries, I know the rebels in Liberia, I know the people on the government side, I know the political leaders, I know the civil society groups, and I even have a relationship with the Ghanaian who were hosting. And so during the process of the peace process in Accra, even though I was in Sierra Leone, on the email and on the phone, I was in constant touch with the rebels, with the civil society, with the government, with the facilitators. And I had my pulse on the process, and I keep moving from one person to the other, and I know how everybody felt. And I can imagine a week before the agreement was signed, I got this bulky email from one of the rebel groups and said, this is the peace agreement, can you look it for us? And then just that day, the civil society got in contact and said, these are the problems we have. So because of that, using that relationship, putting into the agreement in which the rebels had sent some of the ideas of the civil society. Because women are neutral in conflict, so people don't feel threatened by women. People are able to open up to them. People are able to talk to them because women are not part of the conflict. So even though they are combat, they are secondary. They are not primary people. Their purpose in the war is not primary. They are used for some other reasons. So these are some of the reasons why getting women more involved, because they have control over their community, they have policies in their community, they are working with everybody on the ground. It is much more easier for women to participate in the process of consolidating peace than for men, because men still carry the anger with them, women don't. Because they're easy, they can forgive very easily, they always look to the future, they want their children to go to school, they want healthcare service to be built. That is the reason why women play a much greater role in making sure the country moves forward, you know, and then take the big leap than what men do.
It's fascinating. Ala, I saw your head nodding.
Shall we fly to Iraq?
Please do.
Well, I think you all know it's become a very common knowledge that Saddam Hussein committed lots of crime against his people. And in my point of view, women suffered more than men. First of all, because as a human, they were subject to all his crimes. And second, they are the other gender who have to reap the aftermath of this crime. Let me just remind you of the chemical attack on town of Halabja. Happened 15 years ago. I mean, just recently, the Secretary of State, Colin Powell, visited Halabja and met the survivor. We have thousands of women who, till now, because they swallowed the gas, they can't have or give birth to a healthy baby. They are coming out as a pieces of meat. And many more. We have thousands of widows. And let's not forget that Iraq is a patriotic society which women lay basic rights. Still, there is in many urbans, women have no right to choose their partner. So Iraqi women pass 35 years of darkness. So now it's time for them, a window of opportunity open for Iraqi women to participate in the society, to play their vital role in rebuilding and reconstruction their country. Unfortunately, there is many political parties who they want to put out the women from the political medium and to satisfy her with very partial and minor demands. But Iraqi women are very capable. We have thousands of doctors and engineers and teachers. So that's why we had the first women conference in the 9th of July in the city of Baghdad, where the situation and the environment was very, very difficult. The security situation, till now, it's not suitable for women to go out and even to work. But we had our first conference. Nearly 85 women gathered. There were nearly 7 workshops: constitution and democracy, health workshop, education, economic and social affairs, law. So Iraqi women discussed their needs and their issue, and they were insist that we have to play our role. This is the time. We've been ignored for decades. You can't believe that there were no women in the ministry in Iraq, no Maya, no women as a judge. I mean, this is especially during the authority of Saddam Hussein. But now this opportunity is being open to Iraqi women. And we've been disappointed very much when they appointed the governing council in Iraq. Out of 25, there were only 3 women, and unfortunately, one of them being assassinated, Aqil al-Hashimi. So there's only 2. And they are not representing the Iraqi women. Nobody asked the Iraqi women who you want to represent you in the governing council. And then in terms of the ministry as well, out of 25, there is only 1 woman, and she's graduated from Harvard.
From the Kennedy School.
From the Kennedy School. So that's why there were the second conference as well in the heartland of Iraq, in the Babylon city. We more focused on the civil society. I mean, this time when Iraq is all in general passing to a new life, a new political life, democracy, we don't know what democracy is. We never practiced democracy. I asked many women when we were during the conferences, what do you think of this? Or what's your opinion? Some of them were just about to cry and say, this is the first time in my life someone asked me, what's your opinion on something?
Wow.
Because we have already someone who decided on behalf of the Iraqi people. And then, as I said, we discussed the civil society. Now a huge number of NGOs just started to establish all over Iraq, especially in the middle and the south part of Iraq, because as you know, the north part been liberated 13 years ago. In Babylon, in Najaf, in Karbala, even in the very strong belief of Islam, the religious area as Najaf and Karbala, there is women's center being opened, and they are doing lots of activities, computer courses, English courses, and lots of sessions are running there on health, education, human rights, and women's rights as well. And then, as I said, we've been disappointed in terms of the political participation of women in Iraq. That's why it was very necessary to have the third conference. It was recently in the north, the 22nd and 23rd of October. We, this time, focused on the political participation of women. We tried to find the mechanism, how can women play better role and participated in the political process in Iraq. Finding or indicting a quotas for women, because two very important issues now is coming up in Iraq. The constitution is going to be drafted soon. So we want to make sure that Iraqi women's voice are heard in the constitution. Otherwise, they are going to ignore us and neglect us again. The second thing is the election. So the election will probably be next year, November. This is what the political leaders are, promising. So again, we want to make sure that there is some capable women are running for offices to be member, not only in the national election at the parliament, even in the local elections. Hopefully, in the election for the municipalities in Baghdad, we have 9 neighborhoods in Baghdad. There is women everywhere. I mean, there is women being appointed to be a member of the city council in all 9 neighborhoods in Baghdad, and this is the first time in the history of Iraq. So this time, as I said, we are passing to a new life, democracy, respecting human rights. We think democracy in Iraq without the participation of women is something imperfect. Thank you.
Yes.
We do have very special proposal to support Iraq. As you know, the government of the United States requested to send troops to Iraq to the government of Korea. But the Korean civil society believe troops cannot help, cannot support to achieve a democracy in Iraq, but NGOs can do it. The 50 civil NGOs in Korea made a coalition body to protest sending troops to Iraq. And we proposed to the government, our government, instead of sending troops, let's send NGO experts to Iraq to help democracy there. As you know, we have a huge size of soldiers for the division of nation, but also we have a big size of NGO workers. The NGOs in Korea has abundant experience in achieving democracy in our country. If we go there, we really can help how to settle down the democracy in Iraq. But we cannot send both troops and NGOs, we cannot. If we send troops, we will be the target for the terror. Who gonna guarantee the security of NGOs? We like to send 3,000 NGOs rather than 3,000 troops. I really need your help. The citizens of the United States support this proposal. Lobby to the Democrats or media or NGOs here in the state and support our proposal. Thank you.
Well, Dean Nye, as folks come up to the microphones to ask questions, what's going on in your head?
Well, I think if you were to make a case for why it would be important to involve women more, there are a variety of bases. I mean, one, which is regardless of the effect on peace, simple fairness. I mean, that there's a basic argument in that sense that women should be more represented. But another is the case we've just heard, which was that women often are the greatest victims and have the most to lose, and therefore have the greatest stakes in peace. And I think several of the speakers tonight have indicated that. And a third, which is a very simple argument, is if you look at each of the conflicts that are represented on this panel, and you think of the men who have caused them or contributed to them, I would think of Rio Smart or Saddam Hussein or Foday Sanko or Kim Jong-il. It's hard to see any woman doing worse. I mean, these are about as bad as you can get. But there's finally one more thing which I would mention, which is I think women have a more intuitive grasp of what I've called soft power. Hard power is your ability to coerce soft power is your ability to attract. If power is your ability to get others to do the things you want, the outcomes you want, you can do it in basically three ways. You can threaten somebody, coercion, you can pay them, or you can attract them. And let me tell you, if you can attract them, you don't have to spend so much on carrots and sticks, on threats and coercion. And in that sense, soft power, this ability to attract, is tremendously important. I'll tell you a little anecdote, which is I gave a lecture. I have a book on soft power that's coming out next March. And I gave a lecture to a military conference in Washington a month ago that the Secretary of the Army introduced me, and the various generals who were listening decided that they liked this idea of soft power. It wasn't a complete replacement for hard power, but it's something that should be taken more seriously. And the speaker that night, after I spoke in the morning, was Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld. And one of the people in the audience who had listened to me in the morning asked the Secretary, what do you think of soft power? And his reply, as reported in the Financial Times, is, I don't understand it. My reaction is that's exactly the problem. And I do think that that there's probably more of an intuitive basis of women thinking in terms of soft power. Now, we all know lots of women have used hard power. There are times when they have to. I mean, we can cite these cases of Mrs. Thatcher or Mrs. Gandhi or Mrs. Bandaranaike or Golda Meir who have used hard power. But I suspect that by and large, if you took a sample of men and a sample of women, the women probably have more of an intuitive understanding of the power of soft power, of attraction. So that would be an additional reason, I think, besides the ones that we heard tonight, why involvement of war women in the political process is not only fair, but it's probably likely to be productive in terms of the values we care about.
Thank you. Now for questions, as you know, we will rotate around. Please identify yourself and make sure that your question is in fact a question.
Hi, my name is Saide Rezai Kamalabad. I'm from City of Boston. My question's for Ms. Talabani. Do you believe that the women in Arab nations and in Islamic nations will rise on their own to free themselves from the Islamic oppression, or do you believe that there should be outside forces coming in? And when they do rise, is it that they're going to rise when they feel that it is their time to?
Well, it's really a hard issue in relating with the Islam and women. But I think Iraqi women themselves and the Islamic women in the Islamic world themselves, they can release themselves. We don't need an outside power or people to teach us, because we know what the discriminations we faced every day in our society, and we know what's wrong and what's right. So just if we can free ourselves from this Islamic belief, which is not benefiting us, we can do it.
I think I want to contribute to that, because I'm actually a member of a group called Women Living Under Islamic Laws, and because of Nigeria, we have this network within the sub-region in which I participate. And I think what we are doing within the sub-region is first and foremost understanding the environment, because for women to actually participate in this environment, they need to understand the environment. And we had a very interesting conference in Nigeria in which those who are Muslim know the tafsir, the one who interprets. Because the thing about the Quran, a lot of women cannot read it in Arabic. So a lot of people read it on the English version, and it all depends who does interpretation. It can be interpreted differently. And so we actually brought women who have tafsir, women who are interpreters, qualified professional interpreters in the Quran, and we brought women activists like myself who are Muslim, and we brought women lawyers who are actually going to court to challenge the Sharia laws, putting the three sets of women together to actually go through the process. And it gave an opportunity for the women instruments of the women lawyers to be able to argue on what basis, because these are professional qualified women, tafsir. It also gave knowledge to us who are the women activists. So for women who are under Islamic laws, the most important is to understand the environment, because what we learned in that conference is that the real religious leaders hate politics. The people who use politics as a means of dominating, taking Islam into politics, are people who are really not religious. They're just using the religion. Because the religious people really don't want anything. They feel politics is dirty, you know, and it's something they don't want to go in. It is greedy, so many other things. And so if you are a woman, you are working in Nigeria. I participated in the elections in Nigeria as an international observer. And the interesting thing, for the first time, we had Muslim women who actually trained and observed the elections. And because I was a Muslim, local domestic observers, because I was Muslim, I was actually sent twice. I've been to the last 2 elections in Nigeria. The first I was sent to Sokoto, the second I was sent to Kaduna. And we had problems to get women to come out and vote because the men just said women shouldn't come out. And going from polling station to polling station, the first election, I found out you go in the morning, they said the women are coming out to vote in the evening. You go in the evening, they said they are voted out in the morning. So these women in the Muslim groups in Nigeria then decided to train as domestic observers. So they went actually to police station with their veils and everything, which means they try to understand the system, they become part of the system and the process and try to bring the other women. So they encourage women to stand in different queues, you know, so that women stand in one queue, men stand in a different queue, but at least it gives the opportunity to women to vote. So my contribution is, if you're a woman in Muslim countries, you need to understand the environment in which you are working. If they're using the Quran as a basis to argue against women, you need to really understand the Quran and get somebody who can interpret it so that you can use that Quran to argue. And this is the reason why Amina, the lady in Nigeria, went through, because the lawyers who are defending were part of the lawyers of that training workshop.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Yes.
My name is Josh Good, and I'm from the Divinity School. And I have a question that involves making useful generalizations in contrast to unhelpful ones. And that's to ask this. What's your take on the role of husbands in the most successful examples of women who have pursued peace? Either in the experience of the 4 of you, perhaps, or Ambassador Hunt or Dean Nye, in terms of your sense of the academic literature about successful women involved in public life.
Yeah?
Is my husband here?
Well, I can answer? Can I?
Well, oh, yes, please.
Yeah. Well, I'm 34 years in marriage life. I have 2 kids. They all got married. I have 1 grandson. I don't think I do have a special husband. You know, I have just a lovely husband like others. But we just we do understand each other. We just think, you know, she plays very important role. He does his role as a profession. So whatever it is, we just respect each other. It's not a special role for the woman who takes some role outside the house. That's my answer.
Thank you. Let's check
well,
that
I
out.
think what he says, that's true. I mean, you need a good husband with you. I mean, my husband is my best supporter. I'm learning a lot from him. He used to be a politician, a freedom fighter for 20 years for Kurdistan. So he's supporting me a lot. And I left my 2 kids with him now, and I'm here.
Well, I want to tell you that I am lucky as well because I have a very, really supportive husband. We have been sharing our goals for social change in Guatemala for a long time. And during the last 15 years, when I became also activist in the women's movement, I began to lobby him, to convince him that social justice includes as well gender equality. And I think I have been doing good work. So he supported me, and nowadays he's running for elections in Guatemala. This Sunday there will be national elections, so he's a candidate for the Congress, and I hope he wins.
Hopefully.
Coming from a continent that is actually entrenched in social norms, you know, discrimination, it's one of the most challenging things, but also very exciting, because where I come from, the region where even I come, women are not allowed to be leaders, community leaders, you know. So for me, most people think it's just a freak, you know. It's unbelievable that you come from a region that women cannot be paramount chief, cannot be head of villages, and all of a sudden there comes this troublesome woman who is jumping into the street, challenging soldiers and everything. And my husband also happens to come from that same ethnic group that doesn't believe that women have rights. You know, but he has been very supportive. But my own interesting experience is the fact that because I have been in public life for 6-7 years continuously as a civil society leader, you know, leading the campaign against the military, leading the campaign against the rebel, you know, challenging the government, you become a role model. And when I contested the election as a president, I knew I wasn't going to win because the region I come from will not even vote for me because they would think. But the most amazing thing that happened immediately after the election, we actually, the government decided to decentralize. You know, we haven't got a local government for like 3 decades. So they did something they call national consultations across the country, all over. And unanimously, the country agreed that you should have reserved seats for women. Everybody across the country decided we should compensate the women. We don't want the women to go through the process of election. We believe they have such an important contribution to making our politics. So at local level, we should have reserved seats for them, which varies between 19 to 30. And this consultation went across the country. They had over 200 and something of these meetings. And when the discussion, when the submission was given to the task force that was created for decentralization, the task force agreed. What happened? The government came back and said, it's unconstitutional because we have a discrimination section in our country which says that nobody should not discriminate against anything. So their argument was that we're discriminating against the men. This is what tells you that one of the contribution you make to society, those of us who are coming from society that are so traditional, is the fact that when people see you and you contribute so effectively, you're able to impact people's life and make a difference. People then respond. We have seen over 150% increase in girls' enrollment in our elementary schools this year, and the government has a problem handling that. Ethnic groups who traditionally don't believe in sending girls to school because they spent so many years in the refugee camps, now are all sending their daughters to school. The government has now, the region where I come from, the north, you can count your fingers the number of educated women. Now there's a policy that every child that goes to school in that region, the government has to take care of that girl. School uniform, books, shoes, and everything. So that's one of the contributions you make, apart from the personal life. It's very difficult and challenging. And for Africa, for a woman to be a good mother, to be a successful politician or leader, and to be a good housewife, it's a very difficult combination, especially if you're coming from traditional entrenched society. But at the same time, it is the impact you make. You become a role model. People see you. They're now able to put a face to something. So they feel proud. They want their children to be like, they want their daughters to be like you. And so they give examples. I remember the Annie Walsh School. I did my 6th form, which is like the 11th and 12th grade here. And it's the oldest secondary school for girls in sub-Saharan Africa. It was in my country. And I went there one day to talk to the principal about a niece of mine. She was so excited. She insisted I have to talk to the girls. I have to address the assembly. You know, so that's what happens to you because you become a role model. It is the satisfaction you get that people see the good in what you're doing and they want their own daughters to do. And so sooner or later, that reaches your husband. It gets to your family, and they themselves become very proud of you. Because that's what my husband says to me. He feels very proud because we sit at home and somebody says, oh, your wife is on CNN, or your wife is on television, and he tunes. So but at the same time, you also have the pressure because I talk too much in the sense that you're always on papers or newspaper. So some people ask and say, do you control her at home? So that's what they say. How do you manage her? You know, because they always feel that at home, you are the same person in public life because you attack everybody. You fight everybody. They think you fight your husband. So poor man, he has to be defending everybody that she hardly speaks at home.
Thank you, Sana.
Yes. Let me generalize from the evidence you've heard from these anecdotes. But I think you could find that if you go back to the sessions we had with the prime ministers and the Council of Women's World Leaders when we had them here, that women's liberation depends upon men's liberation.
Oh, yes.
And what you really need is not merely to educate women, but to educate men.
Society.
And it's when the fathers insist that they want their daughters in school as well as their sons in school, and when the husbands have pride in their wife's accomplishments, then you will finally have the breakthrough we need.
Joe, I would just like to acknowledge the contribution of Molly Nye to this conversation. Yes.
She educated me.
Yes, clearly, yes.
Hi, my name is Ron Louver. I'm a master's student here at the Kennedy School. My question is going to piggyback on Dinah's first comment about, I guess, about women being more Pacific, and I think it's a very popular held view. I wonder, it seems to me that the policy implication would be that if we had more participation of women in politics, you would have less bellicose societies or countries.
Less corrupt
I
countries.
wonder if you would comment on that. There are obvious examples in Scandinavian countries, some of which have requirements for women seats in parliament. But I think a problem there is whether, I guess, separating whether or not the pacificity of those countries are the function of them being more left-wing, and that also informing why there are more women in politics, so basically, is female participation, political participation, instrumental to peace, or is it indicative of a more peaceful society?
Right. Me or who?
You go ahead.
Okay. Well, our first woman ambassador was to Finland. She reported what she observed while she stayed in Finland. As you know, Finland is about 50% are women politicians. She never heard about the word corruption while she is serving 3 years in Finland. But in my country, women are 5%, men are 95%. Every day, the newspaper is flourishing with corruption stories by politicians. I surveyed many women politicians in our country. Fortunately enough, we don't have any single woman who are involved in the corruption. So I think if we have more women in politics, politics will be much clean than now. And also, if we have women in politics, we can really reflect the woman's perspective on policy-making process. That means the policy preference between men and women are different. Women make difference. That's firmly I believe, so I'm working on bringing more women in politics.
Thank you.
Just one comment on the difficulty of testing your hypothesis, which is people could try to falsify it by saying, look at all the women. I can think of at least a half a dozen who have gone to war when they've been leaders. Of course. But the answer to that is yes, but they rose up through a system which is essentially male-dominated. Right. So we don't have a situation where we've seen politics which have been primarily equal in their gender balance to be able to test your proposition. So you can either go back to a sort of intuition and say, well, women are more pacific than men generally, and there may be something in that. I think I suggested earlier why I think women might be more attracted to soft power, and we heard practical reasons of why women may have more interest in this. But we won't know the answer to that until we have a more egalitarian politics. But even if we had an egalitarian politics and women were properly represented, women would sometimes be in situations where they would have to use force and hard power. If you had a woman president of South Korea and a women majority in the South Korean parliament, but you still had Kim Jong-il posing a threat just 35 miles from Seoul. That woman would probably be quite constrained in her options. After all, Kim Dae-jung had a sunshine policy trying to reach out to Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-il still cheated on it. So let's not have the illusion that if all we do is have women, everything is going to be peace. Or look at Golda Meir. I mean, Golda Meir, when she had to face the prospect of attack, some people criticized her for waiting too long in the Yom Kippur War. So there are times when a woman will have to use force, will have to go to war. But we won't be able to test your basic proposition until we see a North Korea, which has a egalitarian balance and a woman prime minister, and a South Korea with a egalitarian balance and a woman prime minister. And I'm afraid that's going to be quite a long time coming.
If I may add, Transparency International did a study a few years ago, because I'm a member of the Transparency International Network, and they said, according to their Transparency International,
Transparency.
the NGO, that global NGO that deals on corruption,
Yes, thank you.
and in their corruption indexes, they said women are less corrupt in governments than you have men. I don't know whether that's true or not, but that is according to their statistics. But if you look at the countries in Africa that have affirmative action in their constitution, Uganda, South Africa, Mozambique, Tanzania, and of course now Rwanda, people tell you, who have studied these countries, tell you when women are in decision-making processes, they bring out the issues of other people, the youth, for example. Women tend to focus on how policies affect other people, not just them. Men tend to look at the bigger pictures. And when I talk to women, I go out and campaign, which is a joke, because sometimes when you talk to people, you have to try to convince them. I said, so when I talk about corruption in my country, I said in Africa, because men have a lot of girlfriends. And I said, you never hear a woman having 2, 3, 4 girlfriends, boyfriends. Men have to have extra. They need extra money to spend. So I tell the women that is the reason why men are more corrupt in politics. Because they need more money to spend somewhere else. But women, and secondly, this to me, my practical experience as a woman, I said, women have the tendency to put other people before. When a woman wakes up in the house in the morning, she thinks about her husband, she thinks about her children, she thinks about everybody other than herself. These are some of the qualities that women have. And these are the qualities that needs to be into public policy. So you think about, does this person has bread? What's the healthcare situation? What's the education? Do children go to school? So when you're looking about the issue of the gender into politics, I think you also have to look at the environment, how people behave to themselves. When women go into politics as individuals, they tend, like you said, to be dominated because they have the structure in which they have to prove themselves. But when they are all together, a large proportion, so that's what we were talking, Sunu and us were saying here. We're not talking about 1 or 2 women going into politics. We're talking about the quantity, the number. It is only when you break that threshold, as the Commonwealth says, 30%, then you really start benefiting from the policies. But you don't need 5%, 10%. Until you break that threshold of 30%, as the Commonwealth said, then you start impacting into policy and you start seeing their contribution into politics. Unfortunately, we have one country now in Africa, Rwanda, is 50%. It's the topmost in the world.
Brand new election results from Rwanda. Yeah, there seems to be a difference in how the same women vote when they're in a 5% group versus when they're in a 35% group. It was a good question. Yes.
Hi, my name is Christina. I'm from Emerson College here in Boston. I'm currently studying globalization and the role of free trade agreements in facilitating economic growth in developing countries. And it is evident to my class and I that women are most affected by corrupt policies affecting these countries. And my question is, how has globalization and free trade policies affected the role women play in the political arena in each of your countries?
And shall we relate that to the whole war and peace question as well? All right. War and peace and globalization.
Well, I would like to say that in Guatemala, we have felt bad effects of globalization. We have felt how the economical policies of the government have been deeply influenced for the advisors of the monetary international institutions. And those advisors finally have succeeded in ensuring the capacity of the state to provide free services for the society. This has had a very dangerous impact in women's life, because if the hospitals, they don't provide certain kind of services anymore, who are the ones who are going to take care of the persons who have any kind of ills? The women. If the schools are not providing certain services to children, who are the responsible, socially responsible to support their children, are the women. So really, in the Guatemalan experience, we have had a very bad economical and social effects that has made even more difficult the conditions of economical and social conditions of women. Saying that, I must say that it has not prevented women to continue participating very actively at the social level, especially at the local level. They have been over their shoulders a very strong, a very heavy work in order to have the peace agreements implemented, for example. The process of implementation of the peace agreements has been supported, directed, pushed by the civil society, and women in the civil society have been playing a very strong role. But it is necessary to recognize that it has meant a double charge over women.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Elena Steiger. This is sort of following up on a question that a young woman had asked a little while ago on the role of outsiders coming in, in that context to liberate women. And it's also relevant to sort of what I want to devote my life to in terms of human rights work and conflict resolution. I really want to know what you think, and perhaps Professor Hunt can also address this, what you think is the role or the best role for outsiders, Americans per se, in coming in and promoting women's rights and in promoting conflict resolution when you're obviously not an insider?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because this is what we've been discussing during my stay here in USA. I met lots of people from USA, and they were all asking me about what is the opinion of Iraqi people of having the American troops inside the cities. And I said, well, let's discuss it in another way. And it's exactly what you are saying now. The war happened, and the coalition are there. And if you are asking me, I would like them to stay right now, because the security situation is frightening the Iraqi people. I mean, we are about, a civil war might happen anytime. But let's think another way. How can you help us? In terms of women, you can help the NGOs here, the humanitarian organization, the trustees. Well, they can help the Iraqi women by supporting them, by funding their projects inside Iraq. Look now we are really appreciated that Siwani worked very hard to get 4 Iraqi women to participate in this conference. We stuck 3 days in Amman in Jordan because the US embassy refused to give us visa. We are on Iraqi passport. Mm-hmm. So we are really appreciate that, because we learned, and then we are going to share all what we learned here with our women inside Iraq, organization we are leading. So there's so many ways that you can help the women inside Iraq or anywhere else.
Thank you. We're going to take 2 more questions, which we're going to answer very briefly, and then I'm going to see if Prime Minister Jenny Shipley can give us a closing word. Where are you? Are you here? Are you not here? You are here. So make your way to the microphone. May I give you orders? Is that okay? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Robin Schott. I'm at the University of Copenhagen. I was wondering if some of you could speak to what happens when there's sexual violence during conflict or in a post-conflict situation, and what that means in terms of, you're talking about consolidating the peace, rebuilding civil society. What strategies are available for facing that violence?
Our war was one of the most brutal, and fortunately for me as a human rights organization, we had to deal with that. The youngest rape victim I had to deal with was a 1-year-old girl. And I had to deal with 2 sisters, 3 years and 5 years. They were raped by the same person. And the problem about sexual violence in war is that normally, especially if you have a conflict where it ends up with a peace agreement and the rebels are given amnesty, in our case in Sierra Leone, so you don't have any rights, they actually follow. The sexual violence moves from the battlefield to the homes, to the streets, and to the towns. And one of the things is that you have to do a lot of trauma counseling, because a lot of families, because rape is such a terrible picture for somebody, most of the families reject the children. Most of the children have problems coming back. We discovered that a lot of them actually go into commercial sex workers. They don't want to face their families. And some of them are so medically affected that in a developing country you don't have the medical facilities to actually treat them. I remember dealing with one particular girl. She was in coma for about 2 weeks because they had to do an operation MSF. We were very lucky because about 80% of the medical services were provided by NGOs. So they reacted very swiftly. But it is the reintegration of the rape victims. And as I speak to you, some of the girls who were abducted at the age of 8 stayed with the rebel for like 12 years, now have babies, and they can't go back home. And part of the problem with the conflict is that a lot more attention is paid into child soldiers and ex-combatants than women victims, because they do family tracing for the child soldiers, but people don't do family tracing for these abducted girls who were abducted at the age of 8 and then were raped several times and gang raped. They can't go back home. Some don't even know where home is. So it's one of the biggest problems. And I don't think the international community, actually, the UN mission and others, really have a strategy of how to deal with it. But most important is that you have to do a lot of trauma counseling, how you get these girls back to school. We have an organization they call FAWI, it's the Forum for African Women Educationalists. They build centers across the country. And some of these girls, they actually have child care centers next door to where the school is. And so you move them from the formal school. The UNICEF created something you call accelerated educational curriculum. So because some of them lost like 5 years of schooling, so you then bring them to school and they have special syllables. So they funded the FAWI, which is a women's NGO that is actually targeting women victims of the war, rape victims. And the curriculum includes trauma counseling and also medical services, and they take care of the children. So it's a big problem, especially where it happens in a big scale. But the most difficult thing is when the rape moves from the battlefield to the community. And some of these girls who are taken away by the rebels and turned into wives, you know, when they came back, when they ran away, the rebels actually followed them. So we had to have so many injunctions to prevent these boys from harassing the families of this girl. Because they said, she's married to me, she's my wife, because of course he's had her like 5 years in the bush. So these are all some of the challenges. And most of the time, the women NGOs are not equipped. So like what she is saying, one of the things is the cross-fertilization of experiences. If you want to help, most of the NGOs in America want to help, you also have to go into areas that have had similar problems with Iran, and women who have worked there, raise money to have those women go to Iran and help the Iranian women to build their capacity to deal with the problems that they have in their country, because at the end of the day, they have to take the lead. They have to take the ownership of the process. So that's one of the things you can do to them, looking at other women who have the capacity to help the Iraqi women.
Thank you.
Thank you. And one last question before our closing statement.
Hi, my name is Nib Darlan, so I'm from Boston Latin School. I noticed that you use the word tendencies a lot when you describe how women would be in the government, which I think would mean that you base these conclusions on how women would be according to stereotypes of how women should be. And I was wondering, how would you know that a woman wouldn't act the same way that the man would act when they have leadership, when they are in power, and how would you go about to prevent this from actually happening?
So maybe it's the power that makes these guys behave so badly, not the fact that they're guys.
I mean, who is monitoring a man before running for an office and becoming a president? So why we should think that way of a woman?
Say that again.
Can you repeat?
I mean, when men are running for offices and candidating to be a president, so why don't people not expecting bad things? I mean, why we should expect that the woman, if she went to be a president or a leader, she might tend to act as a man rather than a woman?
Okay, you want to come?
Well, I think in case of a woman take power, we have to redefine
politics.
the definition of power, definition of politics. If we just pretend, we just imitate what men does, women shouldn't be in politics because it doesn't make any difference. We like to enter the politics because we are sure we can make a difference. So we have different definition of power. That power means not dominate, not rule, not control the others. The power we like to exercise is to serve, to care, to lead. This is very much a positive, democratic way of exercising the power.
And
I know we didn't really answer your question. Can you hear me? Don't go away. Don't wait. I'm still talking to you. I know we didn't really get to your question, right? Which is, are we glossing over this and is this really wishful thinking? And maybe if these women get into their positions, as I said, they'll, as you sort of questioned, will they act just as badly as the men do? So let's look at one of the women and ask her, Prime Minister.
Can I, on behalf of the audience, pay my respects to these four women from four corners of the earth? If women lead from where they are, a profound difference can be made. And clearly each of you is leading from your own experience and the circumstances you observe. And that in itself is not only a great gift to others, but clearly you are picking up an extraordinary responsibility in carrying that forward. What I saw in common in your comments tonight was a theme that was consistent, and that is that you are solutions focused. And to answer the question is that while women and men are different, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise, it is also true in my experience that just as men are not the same, neither are women. But what is unique is when women, in my experience, along with their male colleagues, are enabled to face situations together and to share the responsibility of finding solutions. That is when outcomes can be different. I think the women also demonstrated in their comments tonight that each of them has a vision for where they think the destination is, that both their activism and their people want to be or should be, and that they are bringing their own leadership skills to bear. And from my experience, if I can conclude on this point, we shouldn't be unrealistic about what we ask of leaders. Our leaders are simply individuals who are inspired to try and facilitate change, and based on their experience and their motivation and commitment, believe they can make a genuine difference. But each of us will be confronted with different circumstances, depending on where we are and who we are. The fact that we try is the first significant point. And the fact, or the outcome, that by our efforts, if we can make a material difference, then that is an outstanding contribution. I think that women, because their instinct is to nurture, that they do bring something different to the table. But I would not argue that women exclusively, any more than men exclusively, will deliver outcomes that are going to take the world to a different place. What I would say is that if women are at least given the opportunity to participate and sit down at that table and be able to dare to share the dream, then things can be materially different. Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to thank the panel? It has been a huge privilege for me to listen to you. Thank you very much.
I went to one day to the reception to the American Embassy for the president.
Muchas gracias. ¿Crees que lo hice bien?
No estoy
acostumbrada a hablar en este ambiente.
And I thought that was not a compliment.